Bethany Christian Church is nearly 200 years old, and throughout our history, we've seen God's hand guide us to where we are today. And now we stand at the most significant moment in our history, and we all get the privilege to be a part of it. Today, we launch a journey called All In. It's a 2-year vision plan that we believe God is leading us to strengthen our mission, to expand our reach, to unleash compassion, and to invest in the future of the church. This journey will challenge everyone at every campus to be 100% committed to accomplishing the goal that God has set before us. Imagine if every single person who calls Bethany Christian Church home locked arms and went all in to make this vision a reality. Imagine saying, nothing's going to stop me from seeing my family, my neighbors, my community, even this world come to Jesus and be saved. But this is more than just an idea. It's a call to action. Like, what if each of us open not just our hearts, but our homes and our schedules, even our budget, to bring this vision to life? Right now, God is moving powerfully through our church. In nearly 200 years, we've never seen such a profound ministry impact like we're having now. This is our moment, church. Our moment to rise to the challenge and begin this journey and go all in.
We are all called to go and make disciples of all the nations. Though many of us can't physically go to the nations, we might be able to go to a neighbor or in our workspace. 1 Peter, it says, God gives us gifts as far as talents, time, and treasure, and we are to use those to serve others.
I think over the next 2 years, God's going to teach us patience and teach us to be faithful and believe that He will provide and that He's going to point this church in the direction He wants it to go, and we're doing it all in His name, and that's the goal.
Our vision is built on 4 key parts. First, we're committed to strengthening our mission. This part of the plan is simple for most because we're already resourcing this by giving our time and our talent and our treasure to accomplish our mission. Our mission? To get lost people saved, saved people pastored, and pastored people trained to reach more lost people. This is part of the vision that keeps us strong. Over the next 2 years, we'll continue to do ministry effectively to our congregation and our communities at each of our campuses. Second, this journey is essential for expanding our reach. All of our campuses are experiencing growth, and while our Vincennes and Princeton campuses have space to welcome more people, our Washington campus is beyond capacity in nearly every area of ministry, from birth to adult. And we need to construct a new auditorium to double our current size and repurpose the existing space for our growing children's ministries. But our heart isn't just to build our house. We think globally. Through our long-standing partnership with the Paul family in India, we aim to build 10 churches in India and expand God's kingdom worldwide. Third, this journey calls for sacrifice to unleash compassion. We believe that blessing others and sacrificing resources for kingdom growth is vital to our all-in vision. And we want to support Open Arms Ministry in their mission to serve neglected and troubled youth by providing homes and education to those in need. And we're challenging 60 families in Bethany to sacrifice and open up their hearts and their home to foster and adopt children. While not everyone may be called to foster and adopt, we share a responsibility in supporting those who do, just as James 1:27 reminds us. And lastly, this journey is inevitable for the future of the church. Our nation is seeing a decline in young men and women entering full-time ministry. Bible colleges, once trained pastors and leaders, are closing their doors, and we can't ignore this crisis. Bethany Christian Church is stepping in to fill in that gap by creating a pathway for future pastors and church leaders through the residency program that we already provide. We also want to financially support those young leaders, helping them complete their training and their education. To ensure this continues for generations to come, we plan to seed an endowment for ministry and training. Our prayer and primary goal over the next 2 years is 100% commitment. All In, first and foremost, is a discipleship initiative. And we want to learn new things about God and ourselves. And we're asking every person and every family at Bethany to go all in as we step out in faith and pursue God's dream for our church.
I would love to look back in a year, 2 years, or 5 years after this and find that the All In campaign was really the front end of just an amazing outpouring of revival in our community, of families that are having relationships restored, and of a baptistry being worn out, and of life change throughout all of our mission partners that becomes contagious with other churches in the community.
If each of us does 100% of what God asks, we'll accomplish everything He wants us to do. So what if instead of waiting for others to step up, we took it upon ourselves to rise to the challenge? As one body and one church, we can say, this is our moment. This is our time to exalt Jesus Christ as Lord so that the world will be saved. Church, we are created for this. We are positioned for this. God is using us for His purpose to accomplish this. That's why I'm personally inviting you to join me in going all in for this vision. With our neighbors and our nation in mind, we've prayerfully developed this bold 2-year plan. But this plan can only be accomplished if everyone who calls Bethany home commits fully. So church, let's go all in and make this vision a reality together.
Man, I am so excited about all that God is calling us to. And honestly, I've watched that video multiple times. I've heard Matt preach and teach on this multiple times too over the last few months. But honestly, I never get tired of hearing about it. And for 2 reasons. Honestly, I don't think that we can celebrate enough and revisit enough this vision and purpose that God has placed on us as a church. And I think that in a lot of ways, we're stepping into places and spaces and we're committing to take on causes that God has been calling His church to for 2,000 years. And listen, that's not a knock on Bethany. We've been faithful stewards of the gospel in this place for almost 200 years. And now we're stepping into something greater, because the beautiful thing about who God is that He's never done doing a good work in you and through you as you give yourself over to Him. There's always greater ways that He can use you and work through you. And I think this vision in this next season for Bethany is just another opportunity for us to step into the something greater that God has for us. And we stewarded well the good news of the gospel, and because of that, God is continuing to just give us greater vision and eyes to see what He's calling us to. He's calling us to expand our reach and unleash compassion and invest in the next generation so that more people can come to know God and find freedom and purpose and make a difference in this world. And I get really excited every time I hear this too, because I recognize that while I might be hearing this for the 10th, 11th, 12th time, maybe I'm standing among people every time who are hearing it for the very first time. And man, that excites me. And maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you found your way here for the very first time this morning. And man, if that's you, I'm so glad that you are here. My name's Noah. I'm one of the pastors around here. Maybe you consider Bethany to be your church home, but you just, you've missed the last couple of weeks and you're just jumping in with us now. You're just hearing about this vision. If that's you, I would love for you to get one of the all-in packets into your hands. And if you would just raise your hand at your seat, there are people who are walking around here that they would love. Jamie would love to hand one to you. So that way you have it. Inside that packet, you're going to find this all-in guidebook. And it's just going to allow you it's going to give you the opportunity to follow along with the teachings over the next few weeks. And there's some small group guides and devotional content in there as well. And we want you to have this, I want to encourage you to keep this with you, on your nightstand at home, or maybe in your car, at your desk at work. Work through this. It's going to have more information too about those 4 parts that we talked about in the video. And we're going to be on page 21 this morning in the guidebook. That's where our sermon notes start. You're going to find a commitment card in that packet as well. And we're not asking you to do anything with this right now. This is simply, on November 24th, in a couple of weeks, we're going to come together as a church family. We're going to lay up our commitments together and lock in what we feel God is calling us to do. But for right now, this is simply a tool for some prayer and consideration. And it's been a really helpful tool for Jericho and I. We kept it hung on our fridge, and we take it down often to revisit together and pray through and consider what God might be calling us to do. And maybe you're thinking, well, I don't have all that much that I can do. And if that's you, I hope that you understand that if you will just be willing to seriously commit to asking God to show you how He wants to use you, I can promise you He's going to become real to you through this experience in ways that you've never experienced before. And that's our primary goal in this, that 100% of us would simply be willing to open ourselves up to God and open our heart and our home and our life to Him and just ask Him what He's calling us to do. and obey that, whatever that might look like for you. And if 100% of us will commit to doing that, and being willing to do that, to simply make ourselves available to God, then I promise you, even if you feel like your contribution is minuscule, it will make a monumental impact. And we will meet and far exceed this secondary goal of $12 million to fund each of these 4 parts over the next 2 years. Simply continuing to steward the gospel well so that more people can come to be saved. And then going beyond that to expand our reach, not just here in Washington where we're starting to feel a crunch and we're outgrowing our spaces, especially our family ministry spaces, but across the globe in India as well, where there are dozens of pastors that TB Paul has trained up and they're ready to go. They're ready to lead the church, and there are millions there who are hungry for the gospel, but there's not buildings to facilitate that. And then unleashing compassion in our communities in a way that, truthfully, the church has always been called to. Like, we have always been called to meet people's physical needs and respond to poverty in our community. That's always been a call on the church. But I think it's one that we've failed to follow through on a large scale for a long time. And we're facing this crisis in our nation and in our communities where there are currently hundreds of thousands of children across our nation who by no fault of their own find themselves in foster care and in need of a home for a season. And guys, this should be an opportunity for the world around us to see the undeniable necessity of the church, for the world to see the effect of the gospel, to see that we are stepping up and meeting this need and housing these kids and supporting these families in such a way that we lead them towards restoration and Jesus. And we're recognizing God is undeniably calling Bethany to be a part of this. Matt talked last week about how just across Knox, Gibson, and Davies counties, the 3 counties where our campuses sit, there are almost 350 kids in the foster care system. And there are only 73 registered foster care homes in those counties. 350 kids do not fit in 73 homes. And that doesn't even account for the amount of kids outside of and surrounding counties and communities who, through no fault of their own, they've done nothing to deserve it, and yet they find themselves displaced from their home and in need of a safe place to lay their head. And God is calling us to step up and answer that call. We're calling 60 families to be willing to say, listen, I'm willing to open up my heart and my home and provide a kid with a safe place to sleep, and more than that, to provide them, to give us the opportunity to speak hope into their life through the gospel. And not just reach them, but reach their families. Like, guys, can we just think about what this would look like if the church would begin to step into the lives of broken families and help them, lead them towards the restoration that can only be found in Christ? And maybe this is you, that you felt like God is stirring you up about this, like you felt some conviction, some tugging on your heart. Last week, as Matt was talking about how there were going to be representatives here and at every campus ready to talk with you and get your information, get you involved in this. Maybe you recognized like you needed to take that step, but as service ended, you chickened out and you went to leave. Or maybe you just weren't here last week and you missed that opportunity. You have another opportunity this morning. And Elise is here from Open Arms, and she would love to hang out with you in the lobby and talk with you. Or better yet, if you just want to scan the QR code on the seat back in front of you, that's going to have a link to their informational form, and that'll be an easy way for you to give them your information and say that you're interested, and they'll reach out and talk with you personally. But man, if this is something that you feel like God is tugging on your heart about, would you at least be willing to honor him by taking the time to pray about it and consider it? And just fill out this form so that they've got your name and they can talk with you more about this. And then the fourth part of this vision is something that I'm particularly passionate about, and I get to have an active role in as a part of our student team, and that's recognizing the inevitable. That in the next 5 years, 25% of vocational pastors will retire from ministry. And 25% more, at least, will leave the church due to burnout. A polling organization a study from the Barna Group, this polling organization within the church, it found that nearly half of all ministers right now are seriously committing quitting ministry because of a moral failure in their own life or hurt that they've encountered in the church, because they feel isolated or exhausted or overwhelmed. And that means that churches will close their doors, not because there aren't people in desperate need of the gospel and in need of faith community, but because there are not pastors who are there to step up and lead them. And we're already seeing this. We are seeing thousands of churches across our nation right now closing their doors, and new churches are not being planted and opened at a fast enough rate to keep up with the loss. And we recognize that we're witnessing this catastrophic breakdown in this pipeline of developing ministers that God is calling us to respond to. And so we want to seed this endowment program to help to fully fund the education of any student who wants to pursue vocational ministry. But more than just paying for their education, we want to have an active role in their formation as a pastor. And we want to pull them into a residency here so that they don't get knocked out by the stress and the weight that sometimes comes with this calling of ministry. Like, I don't know if you know this, but the staff health that we get to experience here, that our pastoral team gets to experience here at Bethany, it is not the norm in plenty of churches across America. And because I'm not Matt, I can brag about him for a little bit. And I promise I'm not sucking up here, okay? Luke didn't slip me a 20 to say this. But Matt and Luke and our eldership team here, they do an incredible job, a phenomenal job of caring for and leading our pastors. And this is a place where our pastors are cared for, they're encouraged, they're resourced, they're pastored to, have an opportunity to flourish and experience health in ministry. And I want more people to experience that. I want more people to have an opportunity to see what it looks like to set yourself up to be able to run a long race, a long run in ministry and serve the church well for a long time without running into this wall that people are hitting. And so I want students, we want students to have an opportunity to be a part of residency here to earn, to gain this healthy understanding, this healthy practice of ministry, and then go on to either serve in this place as we continue to grow and see a need for more pastors, or be sent out to lead and support other churches. And we recognize that God has positioned us for such a time as this. That we are being called to call and develop the next generation of pastors who are going to lead this church. And honestly, I think that I've done students an injustice because I have not talked enough about just how blessed I am to be able to call vocational ministry what I get to do with my life full time. And I sat around a table with a group of our student leaders who own and lead high school ministry on Sunday nights, and I told them that. And man, I have not said enough. And how profoundly valuable and fulfilling and worthwhile this calling that God has placed on my life is, and how there's nothing else that I could find myself doing that would be as fulfilling. And if this is what God is calling you to do, students, I want you to hear me say again, if you feel like God might be tugging on your heart and saying to you that this is something that he has for you, do not quit on this calling. Don't shy away from it. Because it's hard and weighty and difficult at times, but if this is what he's calling you to, it is the best decision that you'll ever make. And the good far outweighs the hard. And adults, we need your help in calling students into this as well. Like, you're going to see students in the coming weeks and months elevated more and more to positions of leadership and ownership over the ministry here at Bethany. And like we saw Tegan this morning here, and Daniel Kaiser was on stage over at the Vincent's campus. You're going to see more things like that. And adults who are serving right now in serving roles, and you've got a student supporting you, this might look like you may be stepping aside and being the one to support that student rather than have them support you. And more than asking you to be okay with that, man, would you be willing to initiate that, to encourage that? Would you be willing to step up in that way? Like, if you call Bethany your church home, if you have an investment here, would you begin to take an active role in challenging students to consider a call to full-time ministry? Because if I think about what it was for me that led me into a life of ministry, brought me to consider the value and how vital it was from such a young age, more than having a student pastor or parents who instilled that in me, although they did, I think the thing that caused me to consider ministry so seriously from such a young age was the myriad of people within my church family who from a really young age were able to speak into me and help me to recognize that this was a really vital call that God could be placing on my life. Simply by asking the question, hey, have you considered that God might be calling you to ministry? Have you considered that he might be challenging you to be a pastor one day? Would you take the lead on starting to initiate those kinds of conversations with students? As you're serving in B-Kids ministry or in middle school or in high school, or as you're interacting with kids and students in the lobby, would you just be willing to have eyes to see the need for the church and start to encourage in our students that God could be waiting to use them in incredible ways? Because here's what I wholeheartedly believe. I believe that God is waiting and ready to usher in the next revival in our nation at the hands of this next generation. I firmly believe that. And all that we've got to be willing to do is to have eyes to see that and encourage that and resource that well and help students to hear and see that God is waiting to use them in profound ways so they can experience him in ways that they've never experienced before. And parents of those students that I'm talking to right now, like I recognize that maybe as you're hearing this, or you're thinking about what this might look like for you, as you've got a student who's raised their hand and said, I feel God calling me in that way, or you're thinking about what it might look like if your kid was called in this way. Like I recognize that there's maybe a level of trepidation or cautiousness that you approach this with. Maybe there's a fear for you where you're thinking like, man, I'm concerned for their comfort or for their security, their stability and life. I'm worried about the hurt that sometimes comes with being full-time in a church. And man, there's two things that I would say to that. Number one, ministry is definitely not a path to riches. Okay, like my salary doesn't line up with that of a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer, a businessman. But as Jerica and I have been faithful to God in our finances, never once has he let us down. There has never been a time where we've gone to pay bills at the end of a month and the resources haven't been there to meet our needs, or even to plan for a future for our family, and the resources haven't been there to meet that need. I believe that God has supernaturally provided for us in that way, and that comes when you choose to entrust your life to him in this way. And also, I would say that there have been some really stressful and weighty and overwhelming seasons in ministry that I've experienced. I've experienced some hard things, but you know what? In those seasons, I've felt God supernaturally protecting my heart as well. And it's during those times where I've gotten to recognize that the power and presence of God in my life in a way that I've never experienced it before. It's in those seasons where I've recognized God to be real in ways that I've never experienced him before. And honestly, this is the question that we just have to be willing to ask. Whether we're talking about a call to ministry or we're considering what God might be calling us to do, to be all in and be a part of this vision, what is more important in life? What's most important in life? Is it wealth or comfort, stability, security? Or is it getting to experience the power of God at work in you to grow his church and build his kingdom? Like regardless of age, wage, station, location, we've got to be willing to ask this question: where do my priorities lie? Where do my priorities lie? I love how we're seeing our kids and B kids in a middle school ministry starting to take on all in and be a part of this in their own way. Matt talked last week about the Who's Matt girl and the bricks that were handed out to every kid in middle school and in children's ministry. They were challenged to fill and be a part of this. And I was talking with a parent of a fifth grader this past week, and he was talking about how his kid came home with this box in his hands, and he was so excited about this. Like he was pumped up. He was ready to go, and he was asking his parents. He was like, "Hey, I've got $80 in the piggy bank right now. Like, do you think that maybe God is calling me to give him all 80 of those dollars?" And they were like, "Well, I mean, buddy, that's something you've got to sort out with God. That's something you've got to pray about and ask him what he's calling you to be all in." And in those moments, though, he was pumped up. Like he was stirred up and ready to go. He was ready to give all 80 of those dollars to Jesus and go all in. But then about Wednesday of that week rolled around, and he started to do some online shopping. And he's noticing some things that he'd really like to have. And he goes to his dad and he says, "Hey, $80, that was crazy, right? Like, I want to be involved. I don't know why I thought I had to do that. Like, nobody else is doing $80. Come on." And I love that we get to see such a clear picture of the human heart in our kids at times, because I think plenty of us have had a similar reaction to that ourselves. Like maybe you heard about this for the first time at a vision night a few months ago, or you heard about this for the first time in service a couple weeks ago. And in those moments, as you were hearing about the causes that God is calling us to be a part of and the ways that he's calling us to expand our reach and unleash compassion and invest in the next generation of the church, man, in those moments, you were feeling real stirred up and convicted. And you were ready to lay up a big commitment, to step into this in a huge way, to go all in, to open up your heart and home and give your time and your finances in a way that you've never done before. But then as that excitement started to wear off and things began to settle back in, maybe you came to a place too where you were thinking, "Man, that was crazy, right? Like, I want to be involved in this, but I don't know why I thought I had to be that involved." Here's the thing. I think sometimes in a moment when we encounter God's Spirit, we're ready to fully commit in a radical and powerful way. But then we start to consider these competing priorities in our life. And we really want to experience God working in us and using us, but we also really want comfort. And we've been saving for that new vehicle or that addition to our home a lot longer than we heard about this campaign. And man, we really want to serve and care for those in need, and we want to invest in the church, but we also really want security for our family. And we don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know if that cost of living raise is going to come at the end of the year. We don't know if that commitment that we make in 2 weeks is going to start to cut into our savings a year from now. And Jesus tells us this is exactly the way that the human heart works. In the Gospel of Matthew, he's talking to this crowd of people who have been following around because they've seen him perform these miracles and they've heard him speak in a way that they've never heard before. And in those moments that he's with them, he looks out into the crowd and he looks into their hearts and he recognizes like they are stirred up and convicted. And so he tells them this story. And he says, this message that you're hearing right now, this message of the gospel, it's like a seed being scattered on the soil of your heart. And some of you, man, your hearts are hard right now. And you don't understand the gospel that I'm preaching. And so there's no way that this seed is going to take root in you. But some of you, your hearts are fertile ground. And the seed of the gospel, it can grow in you. It can take root. And it's going to start to change you and produce something new in you. It's going to start to bear fruit. But some of you have fertile ground growing in your heart, but you also have some weeds and briars growing there too. And those weeds, those thorns, they're the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth, Jesus says. And though your heart may have fertile ground for the seed of the gospel, it's only going to be able to grow so much in you because it's going to begin to be choked out by these competing priorities and concerns in your life. And that's the tension that I think so many of us are stuck in right now. Like, man, we have a heart for God's kingdom, but we also have competing priorities in our life, and they're limiting us from the greater work that God wants to do in us and through us. And so I'll ask you again, as you're thinking through this vision that God has laid before us and you're examining your own heart, how would you honestly answer this question to yourself? Where do my priorities lie? Are you more concerned with comfort or wealth, stability or security? Or is growing God's kingdom truly your highest priority? Because here's the promise that we have from Christ himself, that if you will seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, everything else you need will be given to you. And the thing is, sometimes it's our misaligned priorities that keep us from the something better that God has for us. And not only that, but they end up leading us away from God and into trouble. As we've been following along with Abraham's story, as we've been walking through this series, we get to see this lesson play out in his story. If you want to grab your Bible and flip to Genesis chapter 13 and 14, it's going to be on pages 9 and 10 in the Bible that the church has provided. But we've been jumping out a little bit in Abraham's story, but at this point here in Genesis 13, Abraham has stepped out in faith. He's left his home to go to this place that God is calling him to. He's arrived in the land of Canaan where God has called him to be. And it says that he's starting to accumulate some wealth. He's become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and in gold. And here's what it says in verse 5 of Genesis 13. It says, now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land couldn't support them while they were staying together, for their possessions were so great that they weren't able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's, the Canaanites and the Perizzites that were also living in the land at that time. So Abraham and Lot, they start to settle into this place that God has called them to, and they start to build wealth, but their wealth and possession begins to create problems for them. They've accumulated so much that the land can't sustain it. It was causing stress. In other words, the upkeep and resource to maintain the wealth they were building became a burden for them. And I think we experience this plenty in our own lives too. right? That as we settle in life and we expand and we upgrade, that wealth that we build, it requires more of us. And that new car, man, it looks so nice on the lot. And the salesman, he talked you into the trade, and you were finally able to negotiate the payments down to a point where they could fit into your budget, but then you got it home and you got sucker punched by the unexpected insurance costs. Or you bought the boat to make the family memories, but the time and money to winterize and de-winterize and do the maintenance and the upkeep, that all came with it too. And the truth that we discover is that everything that we add to our life, with every little thing, more time and effort is required to maintain it. I decided to take up hunting this year. I was up in the stand this past week and had an 8-point buck come right by me and I couldn't get the shot off. And I'm afraid that I'm going to regret that for the rest of the season or maybe the rest of my life. If you ask my wife, she'll tell you that Indiana living is changing me in ways that she never would have anticipated when she met me in college with the skinny jeans and the floppy hair. But somebody gave me a crossbow and the arrows to go with it. I thought, man, I'm ready to go. But it turns out there's a little bit more required to start up hunting than just a weapon and some spare time, right? You got to buy the license and you got to take the hunter's ed class because the government wants to take advantage of you and ruin your fun. And now I'm down this whole rabbit hole of like the proper equipment and better clothing. And if I want to buy the trail cameras that don't require the SD that I have to drive out and go pick up to check, then I've got to pay the subscription to go with them. And it's like everything in life these days requires a subscription, right? Every product you buy has a monthly cost to go with it. And as we continue to build out our life, it has this way of snowballing. And it takes up more time and space and resource than we originally anticipated. And listen, I'm not condemning wealth. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a hobby. I'm simply saying that if we're not careful, man, our wealth and our possessions, they can have a way of taking over our life and they start to skew our priorities and at times keep us from the something better that God has for us and wants from us. And they can even lead us away from God. And that's exactly what happens with Abraham and Lot. As you keep reading, Abraham says to Lot, hey, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we're close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll go to the left. And Lot looked around and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and he set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and sinning greatly against the Lord. So Abraham's solution to the fact that his family's wealth was growing beyond what the land could sustain was to say that him and Lot should part ways. And Lot looks out to the east and he sees that it looks like the better land. And so that's what he picks. And he heads in that direction towards one of the most evil civilizations in human history. You see, their wealth skewed their priorities in such a way that they were willing to let their pursuit of greater wealth and comfort lead them into an environment that threatened their very life and their relationship with the Lord. And you might be thinking, well, Abraham didn't go that way. Like he went the opposite direction. But the thing is, Abraham was willing to go that way, wasn't he? He told Lot, I'll take whatever you don't want. And still, because Abraham let Lot make the decision to head towards Sodom, it creates a whole bunch of problems for them both down the line. And we don't have time to dive any deeper into this story, but I want to encourage you to check it out for yourself. Some pretty messed up stuff happens as a result of this move that Abraham lets Lot make. I mean, right away in the next chapter, you see that Lot ends up being conquered and all of his possessions are carried off and he and his whole family are taken as slaves. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole domino effect of trouble coming for God's people because of this decision. Because Abraham didn't ever consider God or his relationship with him as a factor in these decisions that he was making. But here's the thing, Abraham never explicitly sins here. Like nowhere in this story do you see that Abraham explicitly sins. He doesn't turn his back on God. He doesn't lie or cheat. He doesn't ignore God's direction. And the lesson in this is not that wealth and possession is evil. Don't misunderstand me here. The problem here didn't come because Abraham directly sinned. The trouble came because Abraham in this moment has convinced himself that he can have God as the highest priority in his life, but then at the same time he can place his wealth and comfort right up there too. Not above God, but equal to him. And the lesson that we learn in this story is that, man, God plus anything equals nothing. God plus anything equals nothing. Like we convince ourselves that we can be all in for Jesus, but then at the same time create equal space in our heart for our hobby or our job or our kids' sport or that vice, whatever it is that we're running to in equal measure to God in order to try to give us the peace and the fulfillment and the purpose and the comfort that only God should be giving, that we should only be seeking from him. And Jesus says clearly, no one can serve two masters. Listen, it doesn't work. Either you're gonna hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and you'll despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. And he talks about money here because it's typically our possession that has the tightest grip on our heart. But honestly, I think that you can swap anything else in and fill that blank and the statement stays true. You can't serve both God and your career. You can't serve both God and your hobby. You can't serve both God and anything. And listen, I don't think that Jesus is saying here that we have to truly hate and despise our wealth or our possessions. I think he's using strong language to make a powerful point. And that point is that it does not work to place anything in our life an equal priority to God. And you can use your career or your wealth or your passion to live out a greater love for God, but you cannot love God and those things equally. It doesn't work. And honestly, I think this is the reason, this is how so many people get burned out on faith and they fade away from God most often. It's not that they have some major existential crisis of faith. It's not that they have some major moral failure. It's that they try to place God in equal priority with something else in their life, and they become disillusioned with God because they're not getting the experience with him that we brag about on a Sunday morning. And the truth in that is that, man, if you've got one foot in God, with God, and you've got one foot in this world, you will never experience all that God has for you. You will never find the fulfillment that he's offering you. Because God plus anything equals nothing. It's only when we come to a place where we intentionally put everything else in our life in a position below God and his kingdom that we're going to find the fulfillment that he has for us. And so I want to ask you again, where do your priorities lie? And as we're talking this morning about what God is calling us to, what weeds are growing in the soil of your heart that threaten to choke out what God is trying to grow and produce in you. Specifically when it comes to this vision, like what are you trying to prioritize as equal to God and above God in your life, and it's keeping you from going all in for him? What is that thing? Is it something that you want, that you've been saving for a lot longer than you knew about this? Is it your desire for comfort or control? Is it a fear about the future? Is it simply a way that you're managing your time? To where you don't even have room for God to speak to you and to work on your heart and show you what he wants from you, because day after day, your head is hitting the pillow and you haven't even stopped for a moment to open his word or speak to him in prayer. Or man, you've overloaded your schedule to the point where maybe you find 1 hour in a given week to stop in here and catch a sermon, but you've blocked yourself in so bad, you don't have the capacity beyond that to step into a serving role or join a small group. What is keeping you from putting God at the place of sole first priority in your life? Because honestly, if you keep putting him in a position where he has to compete for that, you're going to become quickly disillusioned with his church, and you're never going to experience the good that he has for you. When Jarek and I built our house a few years ago, one of the things that we had to cut out of the build in order to be able to afford it was the garage. We just couldn't build our garage in order to and still complete the financing, and so we decided that we were going to put that off. But that, having to walk out to our car in the rain and having to take the time to defrost it and clear it off in the winter, like every one of those trips out to the vehicle, it would be a good reminder and good inspiration to be saving really intentionally for that addition to our house. And about 6 months ago, we finally got to the point where we had enough saved up to put a down payment on the addition and finance the rest. And about 6 months ago is when we started talking about All In for the first time as a staff. And listen, I don't want you to hear me like saying this like I'm bragging. I'm not. And I don't have things together. There's still a lot of things in my life where I'm recognizing priorities need to shift to make the proper room for God in my heart. But Jarek and I realized that addition to our home has got to be something that waits if we want to intentionally place God in a position above our comfort and our wealth in life. And those dollars that could go towards a monthly payment, and some of that money that we've saved up for the down payment, God is calling us to lay up as an offering to him. And honestly, we're not even upset about it. Like, we had to do some wrestling with our own desire at first, not gonna lie, but we're at a point now where we're just excited. Because we recognize that God is calling us to do something. He's calling us to step in to an area of faith in our life that we've never done before. And as we do, we can't wait to experience him in a new way. And guys, I'm telling you, there is nothing in my life that I've ever given up for the sake of God's kingdom that I've come to regret. I mean, when Jarek and I got married, we were so broke. So broke. Like, I cannot believe that her dad gave me her hand. Our grocery budget was $100 a month. But still, 10% of every dollar that we made went back to the Lord. And I firmly believe that that's the reason why a bill never went unpaid. And why when disaster and emergency came, the funds were always there to cover it. And more than that, God has continued to meet and exceed our every need and bless us in ways far beyond what we can deserve. And listen, I don't know what that thing is for you that God is calling you, is stirring your heart about. He's calling you to give up for the sake of his kingdom. But I am telling you, I can promise you that if you are willing to give it over to him, you will not regret it. Because the promise in his word that has been proven true over and over again, not just in my life, but in the life of every single person who's chose to trust him in this way, is that we will seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Man, he will meet and exceed our every need according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. What is God calling you to? Will you pray with me? God in heaven, Lord, you are so worthy of all the honor and the glory and the power and the praise, and you're worthy of everything that we could give to you. You're worthy of our whole life, every beat of our heart, every breath that we breathe. And God, I praise you that as we give ourselves over to you, that's when we find everything that we're looking for in life. God, I praise you that you don't need us, you want us. And you invite us to be a part of your plan to redeem and reconcile all of humanity back to you. Lord, right now I pray that you would start to loosen the roots of those things that are crowding out our heart so that your gospel can continue to take root in us, that you can continue to change us and grow us and shape us and produce in us all the things that you want in us and from us. God, I pray right now over the heart and mind of anybody who's hearing these words and they're wrestling still. And they're hearing those words from the deceiver that's telling them they've got to strive to find their own security. They've got to strive to find their own stability. They've got to ensure their own future. They've got to seek to find fulfillment on their own terms. God, I pray that your truth would overwhelm those lies. And that they would come to a place of surrender this morning so they can experience everything that you're offering them. Pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.